I'm about law and order, but you got to keep in mind this is about law and justice. Justice is getting a proportional penalty for what you did. Sending a man to prison for stealing a nail gun, that's just insanity.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Matthew Clark is the president of the Alabama Center for Law and Liberty, which is the nonprofit litigation arm of the Alabama Policy Institute. Those folks are everywhere, and a contributor for 1819 News, which is also a subsidiary of the Alabama Policy Institute. Matt, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Lots of folks aren't willing to, have a conversation with people that they might disagree with, so I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Jacob. It's an honor to be with you.
Yeah, great to have you. So, you first came on my radar when you wrote an op-ed about Danny Carr. You were lamenting his proclamation that he's not going to be prosecuting abortions. Now, I'm not interested right now in a debate on abortion. I think both of our positions are pretty clear, and people can look that up. But in your op-ed, you mentioned something. You mentioned some criteria for prosecutorial discretion, and I was interested if you could elaborate on that for me. From your article, you said, first, if the law is unclear, the prosecutor necessarily has to use his discretion on how to proceed, and a prosecutor can decline to prosecute when doing so would be fundamentally unjust. So those are your two criteria that you had, if it's unclear or if it's unjust. Is that in the Alabama Code somewhere?
No, not as far as I know. But however, I think it comes from just the nature of the beast. So I worked for about 4 years on the Alabama Supreme Court as a staff attorney before I got out into private practice. And one thing that was just shocking to me has been, look, I'm all about law and order. And I think, regardless of where we fall on the political spectrum, we can all agree that we need some level of law enforcement in order to survive as a society. However, the way that things work nowadays, I think we have an over-criminalization of a lot of stuff. If one person commits one offense, it can fall into maybe about 3 or 4 different categories of crimes because, we've passed so many laws. And so it's not really 100% clear which one you ought to pick. And so in cases like that, prosecutors, they've traditionally enjoyed some level of discretion, saying, okay, option A would get us the longest prison sentence. It's kind of a stretch, but, if we really want to be hard on this guy, we can go for that. Option 2, the penalty fits the crime a little better. We got a pretty good shot of landing that. Option 3 might go a little bit easy on the guy. Which one do we want to pick? That's the kind of discretion that prosecutors across states, whether it's in Alabama or elsewhere, have traditionally enjoyed. And then second, our legislature doesn't always do a very good job of making clear what the offense is. It's no secret that sometimes legislators can pass laws that are either poorly written or things like that, just in order to score political points with their constituency. And then when they find out the law is actually enforced, they get shocked. So in cases like that, where it's not that it's not necessarily that they passed a law that they're surprised that would be actually enforced, but a law that is so badly written that it's hard to figure out what the law is, what the offense is, how do you prove it, things like that. In cases like that, prosecutors necessarily have to figure out, how do I make sense out of this mess? And so in a lot of cases like that, there's a lot of gray that they're dealing with, and they can decide how to proceed. So I think in cases like that, both where the law presents you with a lot of options or where it's very unclear, those are where prosecutorial discretion really come into play. I think it's a completely different matter when the law is black and white and you just don't like it. But in the cases I mentioned before, though, I think prosecutors have to use discretion in order to do their job.
But that's not like I looked for it. I'm not gonna pretend that I spent hours and hours and hours looking for any, but I couldn't find any guidance at all, and I found multiple things that said that more or less, or actually in actuality, district attorneys, attorney generals have unilateral discretion about what they do and don't prosecute and how they prosecute it and what they try to get for it, and that there's nothing in the Alabama. I looked in the Alabama Rules of Professional Conduct on judicial.alabama.gov. Special responsibilities of prosecutor. Didn't find anything about prosecutorial discretion. I mean, I can't find any guidance at all saying that they have to enforce every single law.
Sure. So if you're looking for like a code or something like that lays out here's when you enforce the law, here's when you don't enforce the law, you're not going to find it. Now in the Alabama Code, for district attorneys, it does say that they can be impeached, and one of the explicit grounds for impeachment is willful dereliction of duty. So we do have kind of a gray area here. You're not going to find like a comprehensive code saying, in classes A, B, and C, of crimes, you have some discretion there, but in D, E, and F, you don't. But what the Alabama Code does say is it can rise to the level of willful dereliction of duty, where you are not enjoying a reasonable level of discretion, but you are just absolutely declining to do your job. And in cases like that, the Alabama Attorney General has a duty to initiate impeachment proceedings against district attorneys that don't do that. That's under Title 36 of the Alabama Code. I can get you specific code sections if you'd like to know.
Sure.
But
yeah, so I think I think that's interesting, and so and so basically there's an impeachment process. If people in the government maybe think that there's a dereliction of duty, quote unquote, but there's no real guidance, and so it's basically like are the people in power happy with the way that you're enforcing the law? And I guess my issue with the idea that one district attorney is not going to enforce one law is that district attorneys across the state of Alabama, including the Attorney General, it seems to me, don't enforce laws all the time. It's all and specifically with regards to wage theft, which is you could classify that as just any other type of theft. It's most of the time it's not. Most of the time, wage theft is prosecuted civilly and is taken care of by the Department of Labor. But I don't see any reason why a district attorney, and in fact, district attorneys across the country are beginning to. There are some that are beginning to have wage theft and worker protection divisions that are prosecuting criminally, that are moving forward with criminal prosecutions when bosses are stealing from workers. But that's something I don't think even the most, I don't even know if we have really a left-wing district attorney in the state of Alabama. But, to the extent that we do, I'm not aware of any district attorney that's prosecuting wage theft, which is something that multiple studies have shown is responsible for more theft than all goods stolen in all other property crime. This is something that is a widespread issue: overtime violations, people not getting paid for what they worked, people being told to clock out early, not getting paid for the last hour of their shift, things like this. This is super widespread, and nobody across the state of Alabama cares about it. Is that and so when I hear people take issue with one district attorney not prosecuting one law, it makes me question a bit their sincerity, if that makes sense, to a neutral law and order idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from, because you have to be consistent. If the rule is that prosecutors have to enforce the law, then it really comes down to, well, what do you do with laws that you don't like? You can't be selective. You either got to enforce them or you need to not, but you have to be consistent. So I see where you're coming from. I have to confess, I haven't looked into the wage theft issue, so I'd have to look into that a little bit more before I could comment intelligently. Based on what you're telling me, it does sound to me like, generally speaking, this is more of a civil matter. Now, again, I haven't looked up the statutes, so I can't comment on that. So if it's civil, the courts are open and you can fight it out there. But if it is criminal, and if the DAs are getting complaints and they're not going after it, then yeah, I think they have some explaining to do for for why not. Now, what I will tell you in my experience dealing with DAs in Alabama, I think um, I sound weird to a lot of my conservative friends saying this, but I think generally speaking, I think Alabama DAs have a problem with overkill. Especially in those scenarios where there are multiple laws that address the offense, and a lot of the times they tend to go for enforcing the hardest rule possible. For instance, a couple years ago, I was representing a client who got caught stealing a nail gun from Lowe's. That was wrong. That was theft. He deserved to be punished for that. But because of how the prosecutor misread the statute, he prosecuted him for first-degree robbery, which is a kind of robbery that happens when you pull a gun on somebody when you're trying to, get away with it. And that did not happen in this case. And because of Alabama's habitual felony offender law, that was his third strike for property crimes, and he got a life sentence because of that. A life sentence for stealing a nail gun, yeah, from Lowe's. So that's the kind of stuff that I've seen over my career, where I have to speak up sometimes and tell some of our conservative district attorneys, saying, "Look, I'm about law and order, but you got to keep in mind this is about law and justice. Justice is getting a proportional penalty for what you did. Sending a man to prison for stealing a nail gun, that's just insanity." So anyway, Jacob, in my experience, I've seen very little of Alabama prosecutors declining to prosecute crimes. If anything, I think they go for the jugular a lot.
Yeah, so I can kind of explain the wage theft issue is traditionally, wage theft is theft. You could just prosecute it as theft, right? There's no reason you say you owe this person based on the terms of his employment a certain amount of money and he doesn't get it. That's theft. We could just literally prosecute that as theft. Most of the time, it is taken care of civilly, which conveniently for bosses comes with no criminal penalties. And when, like you said, somebody steals a nail gun, which is much less than bosses steal from workers in the form of wage theft, he potentially gets a life sentence, where bosses might have to pay back wages. Might is the operative word there. And the civil penalties, most of the times, as I'm sure you can imagine, most of the time people do not report the theft, but sometimes they don't even know that they're being stolen from. Sometimes they know very well that they're being stolen from, but they fear retaliation for reporting it. And so you can imagine that these reports are few and far between. And a lot of times, actually, the civil violations, we just had one come out of the Department of Labor with Chipotle in Alabama, where workers were awarded like $100,000 in overtime violations, but that didn't come from it. That came from somebody after they left, right? And so there would have been, if that one person hadn't come forward and said, "Look at this," and the DOL hadn't done that investigation, they would still be doing that, and nobody would know except the workers, maybe, And so this wage theft, worker protections, it seems to me, there has to be a certain amount of proactive, maybe we could say broken windows policing kind of thing, because a lot of times workers are not going to do this. But we know for a fact that it happens. We know for a fact that workers are stolen from, and we have every reason to believe, because of the studies that have been done, that bosses steal more from workers in wage theft and overtime violations than all other property crime combined. We have every reason to believe that, but very, very, very few district attorneys have any proactive resources on this. Is it tracking that workers wouldn't come forward with this kind of stuff, and that you would need some sort of proactive stuff going on? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. This is fascinating, again, because this is kind of the first time I'm hearing of this stuff. I do think, generally speaking, workers could be afraid to come forward because, in a different context. I remember back in law school, one of my old professors told me that if you ever have like a complaint against a judge, it's like hunting a bear. Bring a big gun and make sure you only have to shoot once. So in the same way here, if there is wage theft going on, I think workers are probably thinking along the lines of, okay, if I'm going to speak up, I better make sure I get it the first time, because if I don't, all I'm going to do is tick off my boss, and then I could get fired or something along those lines. So I think so the concept certainly makes sense. Yeah, I'd be interested to explore what options DAs have, especially when it comes to the issue of theft. This is one area where civil law and criminal law overlap a lot, and so a lot of the times people do have discretion on asking, okay, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to press criminal charges, or do you want to get your money back? I think, in cases involving theft, like my clients, I think a lot of the times the primary remedy to pursue is restitution. Not only get the victim their money back, but also slap the violator with a heavier fine. So you got a mix of punishment and restitution in there. But in cases where, let's say, there's absolutely systemic theft or something like that. Yeah, I think maybe that's a case where, criminal penalties ought to be looked at, because at that point, the goal is deterrence. It's like we can either try to get everybody their money back one at a time, which we ought to pursue, or we can try to hit you hard enough to where, it stops theft, and it stops, it sends a message to everybody else watching that this is going to go badly if you try to, intentionally steal from your employees. So it's interesting. It's kind of a classic lawyer answer. I guess it depends. What do you want? Do you want to get the victims their restitution back, or do you want to, stop the practice? So yeah, that's how you look at it.
I'm sorry, Adam.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in here. Matt, I think something that we would definitely agree with is that we do have many overly zealous prosecutors and district attorneys. And I think what you said, that Alabamians are often over-criminalized, I think that's absolutely true. I think the distinguishing factor there, of course, is who, which Alabamians.
Right.
And I liked your example about a lawyer having to go after a judge and comparing that to hunting a bear. That's good. And I think that actually there's a lot of parallel there because of the power imbalance that's speaking to. And I think that's what we see in our justice system, is that working class folks, particularly people of color, poor folks, are dealing with such a power imbalance in the system, and working class folks are over-criminalized when it comes to your traditional crimes that you might name, whereas the issues that Jacob's speaking to in terms of wage theft and other abuses by companies, by bosses, are often under-criminalized and under-prosecuted, under-investigated. And I think the parallel is very clear there, in that as a worker trying to take on your boss or your company, it would be like taking on a bear. Right. And I think even more so in the context of a country like the United States and a state like Alabama, where it's pretty clear the justice system is tilted in the favor of employers and companies as opposed to workers and ordinary citizens. So I'll let y'all get back to your discussion. I know, Jacob, you wanted to ask about Steve Marshall. But I just wanted to kind of share that I think there's some common ground that we have, and maybe kind of expand on our perspective and where we're coming from. Maybe we can keep up the conversation after the show and have you back on sometime. But he mentioned other worker abuses, and that's the next thing that I wanted to ask you about. You're aware of the situation with child labor at the Montgomery Hyundai plant, right?
Well, believe it or not, when you guys reached out to me and asked me to look into that, I'm trying to get my timeline straight. I think I was out of town for work, then I had COVID, then got out of town with my family. I didn't realize that.
Whitney didn't tell me that you had COVID. I'm glad to see you're feeling better, I guess.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. So unfortunately, I haven't really had time to look into that. I have seen some allegations that they've been using was it like 12 to 15-year-olds or something like that?
Yes. Yeah. So back in February, the police department in Enterprise notified the Alabama Attorney General's office that this had been going on, that there are 12-year-olds working there, and that came about because this 13-year-old went to Atlanta with a coworker to look for more work, but her parents didn't know that she did that, and so she filed a missing child report or whatever, and they found them, and the cops were like, "Why do y'all know each other? Why are y'all here?" And they said that we work together, and that's how they found out, and that's how the Reuters people got a hold of it.
Wow.
And when the Reuters people went into talked to more people, they said they talked to workers who there were dozens of children, like preteen, obviously looking people, on this factory floor that has had over the past 10 years $50,000 in fines from OSHA. And I think you being a lawyer, you know that OSHA does not do that very often. And they had a fine as recently as last year, violations including amputation hazards, crushing hazards, and all of this stuff. And the Attorney General's office was notified of this in February. And they haven't done anything about it. And when this report came out, the Alabama Department of Labor said that, we opened an investigation into it, but they told the press that nobody had told them about this before. Nobody had, so the Attorney General has known about this since February, and he did not, even if I think people should go to jail, right? I think that are people in the management at this Hyundai plant who should go to jail. But at the very least, there should be some sort of civil penalties, which would be what the Alabama Department of Labor would do. And he didn't even do that. He didn't even pursue that. Didn't even hand it off to the Alabama Department of Labor. He sat on it for 5 months, and now we're going on 6 months. He hasn't even so much released a statement about it. He hasn't even tweeted about it. But he's had the time to tweet out forms about people who get their feelings hurt on Twitter. You can let the Alabama Attorney General know. And, look, I've said on the show, and you don't watch the show, and that, I understand that. But I understand critiques about social media that come from conservatives. But, there are children in your state working in manufacturing facilities with amputation hazards. We need to have some sort of priorities here. And he hasn't even said anything about it. And this is incredibly, incredibly frustrating for me because 82 minutes after the Roe decision came out, 82 minutes, didn't even take him 2 hours, he's already filing stuff, right? And so it seems to me that there's no concern for justice, there's no concern for protecting children, right? It's just about what's going to play to the base. And so then again, you wrote an article praising him for what he did about Roe, and there's nothing, nobody's talking about this, nobody in conservative media, nobody on the radio, there's nothing about it with respect to the Attorney General letting these people off the hook.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think one thing we have to consider is that the Alabama Attorney General's office could be investigating this right now, and their standard procedure when they're still investigating is not to comment to the public before they formed a conclusion. So that has frustrated me at times because even when I was reaching out to him about Danny Carr not enforcing, saying that he wasn't going to enforce Alabama's abortion law in Jefferson County, the initial response I got, and I used to be fairly close to Steve Marshall. I used to go to church with him and sit next to him every Sunday. But the response I got back from him was, "Thank you for reaching out. We're looking into it." And that's all I got. I'm thinking, really? Come on. I've been in a lot of battles with you, been on the same side, and this is all I'm getting. But at the end of the day, law enforcement has to be careful about what they tell the press before they've decided whether they're going to take action or not. So he has been silent, but it could be that they are looking into this and they're just not telling the public what they're preparing to do yet. As far as the abortion matter goes, one thing we got to keep in mind too is that there had been a case going on since I believe it was 2019. So by that point, the AG's office had already been in that fight for about 3 years. The federal district judges stepped in and told him, "Okay, you can't enforce this law until the Supreme Court overrules Roe." But the day that the court overruled Roe, he stepped in and said, "Okay, Roe's gone. I don't think there's any basis for not enforcing this law anymore. So go ahead and lift your injunction." And that was pretty easy to do. I think that whole motion was like 2 pages long. It was pretty standard. So I think that's part of why the abortion case was different. And then in addition, look, we may disagree on this, and I know you said you weren't necessarily looking to have a debate, but if we're talking about protecting children, if unborn children are people, then stepping in and at your first chance and was trying to stop them from getting killed, I think does demonstrate a willingness to protect children rather than just playing to the base. But I do agree with you that if there is child labor going on in the Hyundai plant, and if there are amputation hazards and stuff like that, then yeah, we ought to show the same concern for them. And I hope he's doing that behind the scenes. So I would encourage you, stay on this story, keep it alive. In the press, because if this is going on, then I would hope that the AG's office or the Alabama Department of Labor or the local district attorney, keep pressing them and say, okay, you got to make a decision. Are you going to do something about this? Or after a reasonable investigation, have you found that these allegations are not true? If you found that they're not true and you can explain why, okay, maybe we can deal with that. But
right.
just don't sit on it.
From the Reuters report, Mike Lewis, a spokesperson at the Alabama Attorney General's office, declined to comment. It's not even like there's an investigation, we're looking into it. There's just no comment. There's nothing from them. And so that's and the Alabama Department of Labor did say that we were not informed of this.
So those don't bode well.
Yeah, they don't bode well. So, all right. Well, I appreciate your concern for that, and I hope that maybe we can continue the conversation, and maybe we can write a joint letter to the Alabama Attorney General about.
Hey,
this.
That would be some bipartisan spirit right there.
That would be something. Yeah. So Matt, I do appreciate the time.
Absolutely.
I do want to ask, as we're letting you go, is it like a little bit embarrassing that 1819 News gave such a flattering interview to a flat earther running for governor, that there's been a couple of op-eds in a row about litter boxes in schools, which is something that's not happening, the boosting that crypto scam right before the crash? Is that it, were you even aware of those things? Is that a little bit embarrassing to be associated with those folks? I'm curious about that.
Well, I know about their interview with Dean Odell. I haven't heard about the other things, but I think generally speaking, 1819 does good work. And as far as Dean Odell goes, I mean, look, I disagree with the flat earther thing. I mean, I just I don't see how you can deal with that. But on the other hand, it's like in politics, everybody running for office is imperfect in some way. And so, especially if somebody comes out and says something that, makes you, squint your eyes, tilt your head and go, really? This is what you're going for? The question becomes, what's the remedy? Do we cancel that person because, they've said something that, appears to us to be so, just off the wall, and just write off everything else that they say? Or do we sit down with them and say, okay, that was a little bit weird, but, we believe you've had some good things to say on other issues, and we're going to give you a fair shake to explain your position. So I think on Dean Odell in particular, I'm grateful that they gave him an opportunity to get his positions out there instead of just hearing, all right, I've got this one belief that, I absolutely can't. I absolutely can't agree with. But, I'm proud of them.
I think it would have been helpful for the audience if that's the only place because there may be people that's the only thing that they heard about him. I would imagine it would have been helpful for them to know that he supports a military coup and that he believes the earth is flat. Those would be things that I would want to know if I would at least want it mentioned, I think. But Matt Clark, I do appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for joining us.
Yep.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.